Well, thank you so much for having me today and for that great overview. In terms of how my love for science specifically started, I think as a young child, I was always very inquisitive and curious about the world around me, like many other young children. And I find myself asking questions like, who are we? How do our minds work? How do our bodies work? Why do we dream? And the tragedy is that for a lot of young children, as a result of the education system we've built in society, that kind of inquisitiveness and love for learning often gets shut down. But I was very lucky to have parents who nurtured that love of learning and who nurtured that knowledge and would often get me books and encyclopedias to kind of pursue that thinking. And so for me, the love of science really came out of curiosity and finding a framework of understanding the world around me. I was particularly drawn to neuroscience because of all the mysteries around it. This was inspired initially by reading the works of Oliver Sacks and V.S. Ramachandran, who are amazing scientists that have popularized the field. And V.S. Ramachandran has this amazing quote where he says, the human brain is a 3-pound mass of jelly that you can hold on the palm of your hand. And it can contemplate the vastness of interstellar space. It can contemplate the meaning of infinity, and it can contemplate itself contemplating on the meaning of infinity. I think for me that captures one of the main reasons I wanted to go into neuroscience, because how is this, this bundle of 86 billion neurons capable of this? And the reality is we have no idea. Despite all the amazing discoveries in neuroscience, it is in its infancy, and we have a long way to go. So I saw that as there's all these mysteries, there's so much to explore and so much to contribute by going into this field. And so I studied neuroscience at Boston University, where I also worked on 2 research projects, one neurobiology focused and one neuroethics focused. So really the love of neuroscience came out of a deep desire to contribute to understanding ourselves and our brains much better.
That's awesome. I guess delving a little bit deeper into that, some of the technologies or scientific areas that define the 20th century were things like quantum mechanics, which will now soon lead to a new generation of computing. It's been said that for the 21st century, it's the century of biology, and sometimes by others, the century of the brain. So neuroscience has been kind of gifted this huge responsibility of being the core of many of the inventions we see over the next 100 years. And I wonder, just from your experience, are there any particular bits of neuroscience that you're really excited about seeing, or where you think might have the greatest impact over the 21st century?
Yeah, so I think this is a very timely discussion. There have been 2 recent kind of breakthroughs in the neuroscience space. One was Elon Musk's Neuralink, where they recently announced that they're going to have the brain implants ready for paralyzed patients with medical issues by the end of the year. And when it comes to moonshot ideas and bringing them into reality, I can't think of another person to make that happen other than Elon Musk. But one of the reasons that him and many others are pushing us towards brain-machine interfaces, so interfacing our minds with machines, is in response to the existential threat of artificial intelligence. So AI, with its exponential growth, with its increasing capabilities, can pose various threats to human capabilities. And many, like Elon Musk, believe that the best way for us to stay relevant is to upgrade our biology so that we are an adequate competitor to artificial intelligence. And what better way than actually leveraging AI for our own brains and integrating it? So it sounds like science fiction, but we've already have had successful implants allowing paralyzed patients to walk. We've already connected 2-3 brains together. So that's really exciting to think about the prospect, but also have those difficult conversations about ethical implications there. Another recent breakthrough that I'm really excited about, a group of scientists have recently used CRISPR to map the development of neurons in rats. So what they've done is with CRISPR, they created kind of like a barcode for every single neuron in the brain, and it allowed them to kind of trace its development from early to when it's really young, all the way to when it's completely mature. And that's the first time we've been able to do something like that. And you can only imagine all the questions that will be answered about the way our brain evolves and matures and develops over time when we're able to track every single of those 86 billion neurons and its impact that it has on our lives and our behavior. And those are just 2 examples, but there's lots of breakthroughs coming about every day.
Yeah, it does feel like there's a lot of news stories at the moment. I guess one thing I wondered when you talked about the ethics of Neuralink, if we imagine all of those 86 million neurons and all the information that's stored in them, there's something quite worrying about something storing those outside my body and not having control over those. Is that the kind of thing you're getting at? I mean, how do we start to have those conversations?
Yeah, I think one of the most powerful tools to try to envision how things can go wrong is to use science fiction, right? Like science fiction writers and movies have been envisioning scenarios about these things for a very long time. One of the potential risks with human enhancement is unequal access to it. So what if some of us have the capabilities, potentially the wealthy, the capabilities to enhance our intelligence and problem-solving tools with AI, and others can't? What you're going to literally probably see is a differentiation in races, where we speciate into different types of humans that are cyborgs and humans that are still biological. That's something to really think about seriously. Another potential risk is, like you said, control and data privacy issues. And we already have issues with privacies when aspects of our lives are stored on our devices or on the cloud. You can only imagine the potential risks when there is a technological tool that has access to your memories, to your feelings, to your thoughts, and potentially for being able to control it. Like, these are all things we need to think about before they actually happen. Discuss what we want and what we don't want, and potentially update policies and regulations around it as well.
Yeah, I think that inequality question is one I hadn't really thought about in terms of brain enhancement. What makes me worry about the next generation and whether we have schools with some people who are super enhanced and others who aren't. Which kind of brings me on to your main job today, which is running All Academy. And I wondered what your own background in education was, your own experiences that led you to want to move into this often quite difficult space to make any progress.
Yeah, so for me, it's funny because growing up, I never really thought I would end up in education or be an entrepreneur in the field. I always loved learning, and I, for the longest time, did really well in school. I was a straight A student, teacher's pet, the whole thing. And I think what started to happen is as I started to work on entrepreneurial projects, I was part of the founding team of Sci-Fest Dubai when I was in high school, and we did incredible. This festival was designed to celebrate a love for science through the arts and engage the general public with it. And we grew to have 10,000 visitors in our first years with multiple citywide venues. And under that umbrella, alongside my co-founder Rowan, we launched Intelligent Optimism, Campus Science Peak Dubai, all initiatives that grew to be really successful. And I was working on all these entrepreneurial projects when I was in high school. And what started to happen is as I was having these experiences that were allowing me to learn far more effectively than traditional education, that were far more engaging and inspiring and aligned with the impact I wanted to have on the world, I started to feel less engaged with traditional formal education. And in university, this was a very frustrating experience because I had started writing as a journalist for the Singularity Hub, working on these research projects, working on other startups like SheWorks, and that was having a negative effect on my grades and on my GPA. So as you can imagine, it was very frustrating where here I am, I'm actually probably way ahead of my peers because I'm developing a skills, resume, portfolio of experience that none of them are. And but my final GPA report card doesn't capture those core skills and competencies that I'm building. It doesn't capture the impact I'm having on the world. And it doesn't engage me because I'm learning in a way that's a cookie cutter style, like hundreds of other students in those lectures, as opposed to in a way that's relevant to me. So it was a very frustrating experience because I started to really hate formal education. I was absolutely disengaged from it. And I saw that my peers were facing similar issues, many mental health issues as a result of the lack of fulfillment from formal learning. And so around the same time, I was hearing from other serial entrepreneurs who were saying things like, go find a problem that really bothers you and solve it. And so it became my academy was a way to channel those frustrations into doing something about it. And around the time that we were ideating this, Rowan, my co-founder, was also, as an award-winning educator, seeing a lot of the same trends from an educator's perspective. So we started working together and saying, let's do something about it, and let's actually come up with a solution. So 2 years in, what we are is we offer future-focused and award-winning education programs as a supplement to education. So we do a lot of workshops, boot camps, that cover themes in areas like ethical use of technologies, creativity, innovation, entrepreneurship, intelligent optimism, life skills, things that are not covered in an engaging and project-based way. But our long-term vision is to develop a complete alternative model to traditional education, so that students have pathways available to them that are personalized, that are not assessed with traditional grades, but solution-based assessments, and actually focus on the core skills and competencies that they need to have in order to be successful. So that's what we're working on in terms of our long-term vision.
It's a really great vision. We were just talking a little bit before about how some sectors are easier than others to innovate in, and education and healthcare are classically very regulated for good reason. I mean, it's not, we don't really talk about over-regulation when it comes to the next generation or our own well-being and health. But at the same time, it makes it incredibly difficult to make those visions that you have come true. So how do you think, can you name some of the steps that need to happen along the way, almost as a call to the innovation enthusiasts in the audience to help you make them happen, to get to that vision? What do we need to change as government employees or as parents?
Yeah, I think regulations are one of the biggest barriers. You're right in that it needs to be regulated, but what often happens is people regulate according to models that exist today, right? So the traditional regulations are revolving around isolated subjects, assessing with traditional exams, the classroom environment. All of this is an industrial era model, and we've designed regulations for that. So the regulatory body does not allow you to not have subjects and make all lessons interdisciplinary, not assessed through exams, but through actual real-life projects and solutions to allow students to be in environments like Area 2071 instead of traditional school. Like there's safety regulations that prevent that, right? We've actually been discussing that. So I do think the regulators really need to start talking more to completely alternative models and pathway designers and see how can we at least allow for experimentation. Right? How can we at least map a certain pathway, work with them, and say, okay, what do we need to know from you in order to make this possible? So I really think the best first step is to start speaking to companies like us and see where in the regulations we're not allowed to innovate and experiment. But also beyond that, we really need to change mindsets about education. Often the biggest stakeholders to change, or the biggest barriers to change, are parents, who are so used to the old way of doing things, and they're so used to receiving report cards, and that's their way of measuring student success. So they will make things difficult if you're not doing things the traditional way. Beyond that, education providers, investors, funds have invested billions of dollars into an outdated model, right? So they have a financial investment into a model that, even though if it's not effective, it's the most efficient way to do things and make money, ignoring the impact. So what we need is also individuals with wealth and capital to start investing their time, energy, and money into alternative moonshot ideas that would disrupt the status quo, because the status quo has a lot of financial backing behind it.
Yeah, I can see that. And I think one of the interesting disruptors in this space has been technology-driven companies, and that's not always the way to go. It needs to be about the experience of the learner. But I know you yourself experiment with technology platforms. So do you have any particular ways you think technology should play a role in this future education?
Yeah, I think technology plays a lot of roles. I think if you look at artificial intelligence, for instance, even though it's limited when it comes to a lot of the general higher order tasks, what it can allow you to do is actually get a data analytics approach to education. You can actually see what a student's agility is, what areas they're good at, what they're bad at, and all that can be automated in a way, and find patterns that human teachers can't find on their own. So it can really complement teaching. Technologies like virtual reality can make learning such an awe-inspiring and immersive experience. Imagine what your science lessons would be like if you could actually put on this headset and go into the quantum world and feel it and see what it's like, right? So it can make things an immersive experience. And then from a kind of cloud perspective, the rise of massive open online courses or MOOCs, what we're literally seeing is that technology is allowing educators to reach millions of people from around the world, to design a course that can allow anyone from anywhere in the world to enroll in the course. So it's breaking down geographic barriers and economic barriers to access to education. But I do want to highlight that technology is just one part of the discussion. one of our frustrations as a team is that there's a lot of investment and energy put into the technological tools that we use to revolutionize education and teaching. But what about the pedagogical frameworks that go over the tools? What about the curriculum? What about the content and the educators themselves and the kind of human element to that? What we're seeing is that a lot of people dismiss that and forget about that. Otherwise, we're just digitizing outdated content. So it's really important to take into account innovation in frameworks and pedagogy and curriculum on top of innovation in technology.
Yeah, I take that strongly in that. A lot of the MOOCs that people seem to take focus on very specific skills they want to develop, but if we're really talking about the education system being partly digital, it needs to develop the whole person. And you don't do that by having a specific technical course after technical course. We know that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Let's not repeat it.
Agreed. Yeah, one of the things we focus on is what we call wisdom-based education. And the futurist Tom Lombardo has an amazing kind of idea of the wise cyborg of the future. So let's say we want to be cyborgs and have neural implants, and in many ways we already are cyborgs because our technologies are an extension of who we are. But that's not enough to be a cyborg. We also want to be wise, and that we are compassionate and have a deep understanding of the world around us, and that we have ethics to back it up. So we really try to focus on developing those wisdom characteristics in the students that take our programs.
Thank you. I guess for the last part of this one-on-one discussion, before we make it into a group discussion, I wanted to ask and delve a little bit more into your personal experience of being an entrepreneur, because it's one of the hardest kinds of jobs to do. It requires a lot of personal resilience. And you've been a serial entrepreneur. You've had several, I think we've mentioned at least 3 different initiatives you've worked on today. So what do you think were the kinds of skills or functions that you had to build in yourself in order to continue in that vein of being an entrepreneur and now to be very, very successful as well?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And if I were to think of, this is something young people often would ask is, what skills do I need to build out in order to be an entrepreneur? I think the key thing with entrepreneurship is it's one of the few things where you can only learn it by doing it. And I think, the opportunity for me to work on kind of the local projects at a young age allowed me to develop things like project management, problem-solving skills, innovation, leadership across digital networks, collaborating across teams, interdisciplinary problem-solving and thinking, networking and pitching your idea. So those are examples of some of the skills I think every entrepreneur needs to have.
Great. Maybe an example of when you had to put one of those into action. I mean, networking is easy just to say is a skill, but actually how you do it well, for instance, is a different thing. Or even that how you kind of pitch something without selling it too much. Those are really hard balances to say, often learned by experience, often learned by getting it wrong. Do you have any particular examples you can remember of where you've really learned how to do it better, perhaps?
Yeah.
Or when you've worked out that you finally got it successfully done?
Great. I think one of the key things that influence the way we market and pitch our academy, and personally as well, is Simon Sinek's Start With Why. It's an excellent TED Talk and an excellent book. And essentially what Simon Sinek has done is he's cataloged all the most successful entrepreneurs and startups, and what he's found is that the most successful ones at selling are those that don't focus on what they do or how they do it, but why they do it. People actually buy into your why. And it's actually a really effective way of also aligning your values with an individual that you're working with, whether it's a potential investor or a potential customer. Then you have the same mission and worldview for the world. So I think one of the ways I found this to be effective is to not to focus on Academy's mission or my mission as an entrepreneur and an individual. To lead with that and say why this is so important, why do we need this for the future of our species, why have I dedicated my life to this, rather than focusing so much on the kind of logistics of it or how we do it. So I think that's just a very simple way of improving how you present any idea.
You mentioned a couple of people so far that have been influential to you. Are there any other thinkers that have really you've drawn from their philosophy that you'd want other people to know about, maybe resources we could all go and learn more from?
Yeah, in terms of resources or recommended books and thinkers, there's a couple. So I strongly recommend Salim Ismail's Exponential Organizations. It's an excellent kind of heavy, dense, but really effective way of breaking down why some organizations are exponential and why others are linear, and why some succeed and why some fail. And it's really informed by the world of accelerating change that we're going through. And they're very specific about what needs to be done. I think that's an excellent resource. I also think, ideas from Peter Diamandis' books, Abundance, Bold, it's an excellent positive vision of how we can leverage exponential technologies to have a positive impact on the world. In terms of resources for the future of education, at Awe Academy, we're launching a lot of guides on this as well that you can check out on our website. Roland Roberts' book on cosmic citizenship, education in the 21st century is an amazing blueprint for the future of education. So I strongly recommend that as well.
And I don't really want to talk about these too much, but I think it is really impressive the number of different things you've managed to do in a short time. And whether, for those of us, particularly this is a women's Majlis, younger women who are here today, do you have any specific advice? More generally in life, so not necessarily about being an entrepreneur, but the attitude you've taken or ways you found of working that have really helped you survive and thrive.
Is this specific to women or just in general?
Just in general, but I'm just conscious of the context of today is particularly supporting other women.
Yeah, so I think that it's really important to surround yourself with the mentors and allies who support your vision and who share your mission for the world. I think especially as a young person, surrounding yourself with experienced individuals who've been through your experience before, who have more credibility sometimes because of their experience is an amazing way to kind of align yourself. I also, I'm a huge fan of the mindset that the future isn't set in stone, but rather something you create. His Highness Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum has beautifully said the future belongs to those who can imagine it, design it, and execute it. It's not something you await, but rather create. So I just encourage young people not to plan for the future or to forecast it and prep for it, but rather think about what is it the kind of future that I want for myself or for humanity at large, and how can I actually create that future for myself. And I think that is a much more exciting and inspiring way to approach your life and humanity at large.
Yeah, I think it's a great sentiment to end on, and one particularly you feel in Dubai is plausible relative to some other parts of the world at this moment. Okay, at this moment it'd be great to open to questions from the audience. Do we have anyone who has a burning question? I can start with one. Any hands up? Throw on. Do you want a microphone or can you shout?
I was just looking at the content that you're sharing on your website, and I really find it really inspiring how you're talking about existentialism and consciousness and awareness, and with your experience of sharing this kind of topics in schools, and it's so important to learn it at a really young age. What has been your experience, and what is the biggest challenge to learning these kind of topics? And thank you so much for sharing it on this platform. It's really wonderful.
Yeah.
And so we'd love to see what are the challenges and what can we do about them.
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you for highlighting it. So one of the things we really focus on is existential intelligence. It's essentially based out of Howard Gardner's theories of multiple intelligences, where it's one of the most powerful theories in education. What he's done is challenged our thinking of what intelligence means. And he's cataloged it into different ways of being smart. So it can be kinesthetic intelligence, where you're bodily smart. You can have interpersonal intelligence, where you're good at socializing. And one of them is existential intelligence. And people who possess this intelligence, or young minds who possess it, often ask really big philosophical questions, like who are we, how are we conscious, how did we get here? And it's one of the most important forms of intelligence to cultivate, because it's one of the hardest to automate with artificial intelligence. It's one of the unique features of what makes humans unique. And it can be a very fulfilling experience to kind of navigate life through an existential lens. So it's absolutely something we focus on. I think one of the challenges, initially it's easy to think that can young people tackle these issues? Because we've done like an existential studies boot camp here at Area 2071, where we deep dive into issues about the self and consciousness and taking a cosmic perspective. And what I found is that young people get it. Like when we, for instance, break down selfhood into different kind of ways of looking at the self, in the Eastern philosophical way, the Western way, they completely understand it, and they're often blown away, and it really forces them to rethink about something as intuitive as their own identities. The challenge is making people realize it's important. I think for a lot of parents, a lot of schools, they're still thinking, okay, we need to teach kids how to code. We need to teach them like technical skills, like about 3D printers and stuff. But it's equally, if not more important, to teach them about human origins and future of humanity and their own kind of consciousness and mindfulness and so forth. So I think it's really important to raise awareness about why we're doing this and why existentialism is so critical for the future of our species.
Interesting. Reminds me to have a good dinner table conversation with kids.
Yeah.
So they can actually cope with it more than
Yeah.
And were there any other questions? Do you want a microphone?
That's all right. Thank you very much. It's very, very refreshing to see what you put together. I've been in the university academic area for about 20 years now. We have lots of brilliant people that come up with great ideas. We have this massive, massive resistance to change. How's that experience been to kind of push that mountain?
Relax. It's funny, my team is like rolling their eyes in the front row, like, oh. Yeah.
I'm banging my head on the wall every day.
I know.
20 years now.
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that because one of the barriers to change is universities. One of the challenges we find with building out an alternative model is when it comes to post-K-12 pathways, universities are still expecting traditional report cards, SAT scores, and that puts pressure on us as high school education providers to do, find ways to convince them. There are lots of barriers to change. I think the education system has been designed not to change by nature. That is why it's 100 years outdated and no one still feels any sense of urgency. I'll often be in meetings where people are like, okay, yeah, we can do it, but it's going to take a few years, you have to work with the regulators. And I'm thinking in those few years, millions of students are going to keep graduating with outdated diplomas. And it's unethical that we allow it to happen. It shouldn't be acceptable. We need to have a sense of urgency to fix the model now. I really think the way you're going to see change is not from the large-scale bureaucratic bodies that are established. It's going to be smaller, more agile entities that start small, but they show everyone what can be done with smaller cohorts, and then start scaling their own offerings. I think the large-scale private providers, established universities, the government bodies, none of them will be able to innovate or disrupt themselves. It's going to come from smaller entities from the edge of innovation, and those entities will eventually scale and grow. And we see this already. We saw how Netflix disrupted Blockbuster, how Uber disrupted the taxi industry. And it's about time it happened in education.
So I have a question. We're talking about how it's important to educate even the parents in a way to come into consciousness about how these existential topics are important. Have you guys talked about any plans of even having a boot camp perhaps for the parents in trying to, the children, because there are just so many different parts of education. It's not only the educators, it's not only the students, it's also parents, the government, there are just so many. So have you guys thought of a plan to also address the parents' education, these even update their education, I feel, in a way, or even have family perhaps boot camps or something like that?
I think that's a great idea. One of the things we're doing now is we're putting together a guide for parents called Alternate Pathways in Education. And that was really as a result of talking to so many parents who would say to us, yes, I too see the flaws in the system, but what else can I do? There are no alternatives. How can I create alternative pathways? So we have started creating some kind of guides and resources for parents. But I always believe that, if really futuristic schools will also engage parents. There's so much of learning and so much that happens at home. And the parents really need to be in the loop about why alternative or futuristic schools do things a certain way. For instance, often for students who decide, okay, my grades aren't as important to me, I want to focus on entrepreneurship, I want to focus on this creative endeavor, often it will be the parents that hinder them and say, no, you still need to, So I do think any alternative education provider should have boot camps and sessions and things like that for parents as well. And it's such an important part of the learning.
That's an interesting suggestion. Got my brain. Our own parents. Were there further questions? I realize that.
Yes, I don't think there's any place on earth that has the perfect setup, but I think the UAE has a lot going for it in terms of being the perfect pilot ground for stuff like this. So on one, despite it, sharing a lot of the flaws in traditional education with the rest of the world, the advantage that we have here is the largely private sector. So they can be a disadvantage to access, and it's more expensive, but because it's a largely private sector, that means schools have individual autonomy. They're looking for ways to distinguish themselves in the kind of capitalistic market, and that means they have higher budgets, and they're often more forward-thinking and engaged. So, initially I thought that when I go into schools to talk to principals, that I really have to sell them on these are the problems in education, this is what needs to be done differently. But what I found is a lot of them are aware. They've been going to conferences like that, they've been going to all these conferences in the region, and they know what needs to be done differently, but they just can't do it with the existing models and regulations. So they're more than happy to collaborate with an entity that's doing it for them, and they just kind of plug it in. So in that sense, it's been great, and it's also a very diverse education sector. There's so many different types of curriculums, and mid-market schools all the way to premium schools, right? So you get to test, as an ed tech or educational startup, you get to test out your ideas in a lot of different contexts while being in the same country. And I think, the fact that we have something like the Dubai Future Foundation, Area 2071, the Regulations Lab, which works with startup entities to allow them to open up regulations when it hinders their progress, and even the KHDA. So there has been a lot of positive support. It is more regulated in other parts of the world, like in North America, for instance. The private school sector is not as regulated. In fact, you can do whatever you want to do, but it's the universities that often put pressure for student education. So yeah, it has its pros and cons, but I think it's an excellent place to pilot initial ideas.
Thank you. No, you're just looking at me. I'll move over one question here and then.
Me first?
Yes.
All right, well done. One's a little statement about rethinking with the future in mind. And the first one is that everybody seems to be asking questions on education is for young people. Why should it be? The past model was 4 to 24. That's when you study and then you live another 40, 50 years and then it has to serve you. The new education system needs to be from 4 to 84. And you just rethink that model completely. The degree structure goes out of the window and you think you have an 80-year learning cycle. So that's the first rethink, which I'd like to look at. And the second thing is a lot of that people here are parents and concerned people. What I need is the employers to be here, to be looking at the kinds of talent and the learnings that they need now for the future. So you've got the tech and the STEM on the one side, but don't need the soft side. And that to me is the concern. As CEOs like myself and others, I'm a little bit more aware, but most of the CEOs do not take the softer side seriously. So how do we take that softer side seriously? That's the first question. And the second is, what do we need to change to have an 80-year learning cycle, not a 20-year learning cycle?
Thank you, great question. And I think particularly brings in some of your work that you work. We haven't really talked about the future of work and the future of lifelong learning yet. So it's a great opportunity to...
Yeah. I mean, I completely agree with that. I think if you look at some of our intuitions and assumptions about education, we have subjects, grades, a certain kind of timeline. Why do we have all of that, right? Like, I think we should all challenge ourselves. Imagine the existing model just didn't exist, throw it out the window. What would you design if you were to reskill and upskill entire populations in this world of accelerated change, where in the next 100 years we'll have 20,000 years worth of human progress in our lifetimes? And I really believe it will be a lifelong learning kind of mechanism of having micro degrees and like modular based education. But I think to get there, it gets fragmented over time. I think it starts off maybe with the high school section, first breaking down the grades, right, and saying it's not going to be grade-based, it's competency-based, so if you master certain skills, you start to move up the ladder. And then maybe they transition that into the university, which would be just continuing to flesh it out. So I think practically speaking, the boundaries will break over time with certain segments breaking it down first. I think employers, while there are some of them who don't recognize the nature of soft skills, I actually find a lot of them are really looking for it but unable to find it. And I think the regulators need to speak to the employers too and survey them and say, one of the goals of education is to create a thriving workforce and to prepare young minds for the future of work. And regulators, when designing policies, need to really talk to these employers. Because right now they don't, and right now soft skills is maybe like one or two things in the entire framework, when it should be the very core of what you develop. Because the reality is that the future is uncertain, right? According to the World Economic Forum.
Aren't parents the biggest problem too? Because they want their kids to have
Yeah.
the degree from Harvard and
There's so many
MIT, but so keep the structure there because I want to stay with that. So they become the problem, and you keep blaming everybody else.
I have a question. Would you want your kids to have the soft skills or the degree from Harvard? If you had to choose between the two.
Me personally, I would take the soft skills.
And that's what I think. I think there are enough early adopter parents with the right mindset for an alternative provider to show proof of concept, right? Those early adopter parents that would already pick not just soft skills, but a really truly effective education model will be the first to buy in. There'll be a small segment of the population. But once you have enough data for the masses to see, the students coming out of these models are far more successful. And why are, coming back to why the soft skills should be at the core, they're the only thing that will be relevant because according to the World Economic Forum, 65% of the jobs young people will be doing don't even exist yet. So we don't know, if it comes to subject knowledge, we don't know what the industries of the future, how they'll change and how they'll get updated. But things like critical thinking, creative problem solving, leadership, communications, those will always be relevant. Those will be transient. So even something like how to learn, learning strategies, innovation strategies, that needs to be the core of the curriculum. Instead of math, English, science, or social studies, the core of the curriculum needs to be the development of these competencies and soft skills. Everything else comes in the sidelines on top.
It's a radically different world. There's some very patient people who have their hands up and I can't remember who it was. So. Go ahead.
So I'm wondering, how do you unwind and relax?
What's that?
My mom and sister are like, ooh. It's a good question. I think for me, I like to read. I know for some people that's work, but I really enjoy reading. So one of the ways I like to unwind and relax is to read by myself. I really enjoy watching documentaries. I occasionally binge on Netflix. And another great way to disconnect is also just spending time with loved ones and friends and family.
Do you read neuroscience books?
Sometimes, yeah.
Is that really relaxing? Is that
Yeah, it can be. If it's written beautifully and made accessible and taps into those philosophical ideas, I think it's a great way of just disconnecting from the business side of things and just having
you
more
mentioned
time.
science earlier, and that's the
Yeah,
area I was thinking slightly. Were there other? I feel like there were other hands up earlier. Okay, middle and then.
What is your message for teenagers like me who are frustrated with this traditional system and are being pushed into the system by saying that you have to study for 8 hours in order to get good marks, which is going to change your life. But for me, I'm not into that traditional studying system. I want to study what I like and I want to focus on the skills, what I want. But in the end, it's family and the teachers who are putting pressure on us. So how would you talk to teens like us to cope up with this frustration?
I empathize completely because I felt the same. I always loved learning by myself, watching documentaries, reading books. And when learning became a structured thing that people did for grades, it was a very frustrating experience. So there's a lot of things you can do. I mean, a lot of it depends, how much you can do depends on your support system and how restricted that system around you is. But things like going to events like this and building your network, for instance, is critical, right? I think generally what I advise teens to do is prioritize building their network, getting real life experiences, and meaningful passion projects over their grades when they can. So going to events like this, finding time for your own independent learning, through all the resources online, and actually finding opportunities to work on projects, launching your own initiatives. Those are all great ways to develop those 21st century skills. But also not being afraid to challenge the status quo and pave your own way forward. So, why are we assuming everyone needs to go to university and spend tens of thousands of dollars on a university degree? Maybe that's not for you. And maybe it will be extremely difficult for you to challenge the people around you. But at the same time, I'm sure there's lots of employers or people like me out there who will support you on that journey. And you need to find those mentors that will support you on that alternative pathway. There's now a rise of companies like Google and Tesla that are completely dismissing the need for a degree. They're saying, I care more about your experiences, your skills, and what values you bring to the table. So focusing on building those three things instead of focusing so much on your subject knowledge.
So Raya, you mentioned support system. Could you please tell us more about your support systems and how your mother and sister have supported you?
Yeah, I've been very lucky. I think even though ended up in a broken informal education, I think I like to think of myself as proof of what can be done if young minds have the right kind of support system. And there's a long list of support systems. So my parents have always been absolutely amazing with risk taking and doing crazy alternative things. I still remember when I asked them, okay, I might launch my own company, and and they were like, okay, sure, what do you need? It was very even in high school, if my grades would get affected from the entrepreneurial stuff, they were very chilled out about it. And it was like, what's important is that you're doing what you love, and will support you psychologically and financially and whatever needed. So I think that's been awesome to have that. I was also very lucky to be in a high school that was very supportive about this, even though it was a traditional formal education and there was flaws with it. I was very lucky to have a principal that would allow us to experiment with entrepreneurial projects within a high school setting. I was very lucky to have mentorship from a very young age in a gifted and talented program. I'm also very lucky to have an amazing team, Rowan, Lara, an incredible team that are very supportive of the whole process. So I think, and there's extended mentors as well that are critical. So I think it's really important to have support from your family and from your friends, but also to find those. Maybe for some people it won't be their parents, right? Maybe their parents are traditional, and you need to kind of find other leaders in the space that they relate to and ask them for mentorship and ask them to be part of their support system. So I recognize that for some people that might be a much more viable option to build that.
And I think it's always fascinating how often if you ask someone to be a mentor, they're going to say yes, almost 100% of the time. It's a thing that we often forget how much people enjoy giving that kind of advice. And especially if you can structure it in a certain way, you can say, I'm not going to bother you every day with WhatsApp messages, can we just have a coffee once a month? Those kinds of things, those kinds of steps can make a big difference, and you do it the structured way, you can really get an awful lot.
For sure, because for a lot of those people, they were mentored themselves.
Exactly.
And more often than not, your mentors are more experienced than you. You can't really reciprocate or pay them back, right? The best way to kind of pay back, not pay back, but reward it back is to give it to someone else and mentor someone else and help them get to where you are. So people are more than willing to, usually.
It's a great idea. So I think we can continue this conversation. We've got the space until about 12:30. There's loads of food at the back. Please eat it. But I just wanted to finish the formal part of this by saying thank you to Raya, and what a paradigm of the future of education that you're also advocating for. It's definitely pretty hopeful on a Thursday, going into my Thursday afternoon, and I thank you very much for that, and I think you could all join me in thanking Raya for sharing.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate the platform. Thank you.